It started in a quiet cemetery that wasn't supposed to exist. The kind that doesn't appear on town maps or death registries. No one buried their loved ones there. There were no flowers, no grieving families, no names anyone recognized. Just rows of blank stone markers, half sunk into overgrown earth like forgotten teeth. And yet, they weren't empty. One evening, a man walking his dog wandered off the trail behind his apartment. Just 10 minutes into the woods, he stumbled onto a small clearing he swore hadn't been there the day before. His dog froze, ears back, tail low. And there, in the center of the moss-covered field, was a headstone. Clean, unweathered, fresh. It had a name he'd never heard before. And yet when he read it, something sank in his chest. Like the sound of a lock turning. Like déjà vu with weight. He felt his breath hitch. He took a step closer and carved beneath that name, one that sounded oddly like his voice when he said it aloud, was today's date. He took a photo, called a friend, but by the time they returned the next morning, the grave was gone. The story might have faded like an urban legend if it stopped there. But it didn't. The man disappeared exactly 7 days later. No sign of foul play, no evidence of escape. His apartment was undisturbed, his keys on the table, and his phone, still open to the cemetery photo, lay face up on the floor. That image has been studied, enhanced, analyzed. The name remains unreadable, blurred by something that distorts only that part of the picture. Every attempt to clarify it results in different letters, and then the graves started appearing elsewhere, in parks, behind libraries, on construction sites, in childhood backyards. Not many, just one here and there, always pristine, always with a name that no one had ever heard before, but somehow felt eerily familiar to the person who found it. The names don't match birth certificates, tax records, or anything at all in public databases. But the people who see them vanish, not violently, not loudly, just gone. Tonight, we'll explore the terrifying phenomenon of the graves that know your future. The names that don't exist yet, but already belong to you. And what happens when the world begins writing your ending before you're ready to live it. Welcome to Tales from the Forbidden Library, where the dead don't always wait their turn. And sometimes, the future isn't written in stars, but in stone. The first thing everyone says is, it wasn't there yesterday. These graves don't rise from forgotten soil or erosion. They appear, fully formed, as if placed, not by hands but by intention. No freshly dug earth, no signs of disturbance. Just an untouched headstone planted where memory insists nothing existed before. One girl found hers behind the swing set of her childhood school. She was visiting the town for a reunion and had wandered the old grounds alone, wrapped in nostalgia. She said the name on the grave was strange. It sounded like something out of a dream. Not her legal name, not a nickname, but a kind of poetic alias. One that felt like her more than anything ever had. And below it, a phrase. She almost remembered. She was gone 2 weeks later. Not dead, just unreachable. Phone disconnected, apartment cleared. Her friends received a postcard 3 months after her disappearance with no stamp, no writing. Only a photo of the grave and the same words. She almost remembered. In every case, the graves are different. Some are modern, made of polished stone with clean engraving. Others are worn, moss-covered, as if they've been waiting for centuries. The style seems tailored to the soul it reflects, as if the grave knows not just who you are, but when you are. A man in his 70s found his grave at the bottom of a dry riverbed he used to fish in as a child. The date on the headstone was from the 1800s. His name, while slightly altered, had the same rhythm and syllables as his own. He laughed at first, thinking it was some strange art installation. But later that night, he told his son he couldn't stop dreaming in sepia tones, that he kept waking up with muddy hands and the taste of river water in his mouth. He went missing the next morning. Search teams combed the area. They found footprints by the old riverbed. They just stopped. Patterns began emerging. The graves always appear where memory runs deepest. A childhood hideout, an old apartment block, the parking lot where you kissed someone you shouldn't have, places where you left a part of yourself, intentionally or otherwise. The graves mark the moment something inside you was buried long before your body followed. Some believe these are not graves of the dead, but of the unlived. They reflect versions of ourselves that could have been, lives we never chose, promises we broke to ourselves, names we abandoned in favor of what the world expected. And when that abandonment becomes permanent, the grave is born. A linguist studying root names in various cultures noticed something terrifying. The names on these headstones often carry phonetic echoes of the person's hidden ancestry. In some cases, languages they don't even speak. One woman, whose family had no record of Eastern heritage, found her name inscribed in Old Church Slavonic. When translated, it meant, "she who forgot her name." She would later be found miles away, barefoot, confused, speaking only in phrases no one could translate. Her doctors said it resembled glossolalia, but when a monk from a remote Serbian order was shown the footage, he simply said, "That's not madness, that's mourning." These graves don't predict death, they don't warn, they confirm. They let you know that the process of erasure has already begun. And what's most chilling isn't just their appearance, it's their persistence. Once you've seen your name, you start forgetting things. Faces blur, routines slip. Favorite songs lose their taste, as if the world is pulling back from you, unknitting your place in it thread by thread. Because perhaps that grave is not for a person, it's for a story, yours. And once that story has nowhere left to go, it buries itself. There's something deeply unsettling about seeing a name that doesn't belong to anyone, yet feels like it belongs to you. The names on these headstones don't match any public records. They aren't in databases, registries, or historical archives. But when the person they belong to sees them, something inside responds, not with fear, but recognition. One woman described it as hearing a childhood nickname whispered by someone you loved but can't remember. Another said the name gave her the sensation of almost remembering a dream, the kind that slips from your mind the moment you open your eyes, but lingers in your chest for days. Linguists and codebreakers have tried to categorize these names, hoping to decode a pattern. What they found was even stranger. Many of the inscriptions appear to draw from language structures that don't follow known grammatical rules. Some seem to borrow from proto-languages that predate modern civilization. A few appear to be entirely unique, names that follow the rhythm of language, but don't trace back to any known culture. And yet, they feel familiar. One expert coined the term pre-names, identifiers not based on birth or lineage, but on destiny. The idea is that we don't just earn our names through culture or inheritance, but through possibility. Every choice we don't make leaves behind a version of us. And some of those versions are strong enough to demand a name of their own. When someone finds their grave, they often describe strange psychological shifts. A software engineer in Berlin began compulsively writing in a script he'd never seen before after discovering a gravestone bearing the name Keller. His journals, when translated through phonetic AI mapping, revealed repeated phrases like, "That was the name I would have worn if I had stayed." Stayed where? He never explained. He vanished a month later, mid-commute. His apartment showed no sign of packing or struggle, but on his desk, one final note. It's not just a name, it's a doorway. In another case, a woman who had always gone by her middle name found a grave with a variation of her first name, one her parents never used. The sight of it made her physically ill. She later admitted to a friend that she'd secretly hated her chosen name for years, but could never explain why. Seeing the gravestone, she said, was like confronting the version of herself that never pretended to be someone else, the one who never compromised. And then there are the cases where the names evolve. A man returned to the gravesite a week after first discovering it. This time, the name had changed slightly, just one letter. But that small change was enough to shift its meaning in an obscure dialect of Aramaic. The original name meant the remembered. The new version? The one who chose silence. He began to lose his voice not long after. Doctors found nothing wrong with his throat or vocal cords, but his wife reported that he began responding only with gestures, then eventually stopped interacting altogether. He now sits silently in a care facility, writing a single name over and over on the walls of his room. It's not the one he was born with. It's not the one on his ID, but it's the only name he'll answer to. There is a growing belief among occult researchers that the names etched into these graves are not merely symbolic. They're functional, a kind of metaphysical address, a way of anchoring the unlived versions of ourselves so they can be stored, catalogued, and possibly retrieved. It's as if every person generates more than one identity across their life, not just in personality, but in timeline. And when enough of those branches collapse, when enough of those lives are denied, what remains must be buried somewhere, not in earth, but in concept. And the grave then becomes a record of what could have been, if the right name had ever been spoken aloud. What's most disturbing is that many who see their future name become obsessed with it. They begin signing it, whispering it, hearing it in static and in sleep, and eventually they forget the name they were given at birth. It doesn't feel like theirs anymore, because once the grave has named you, the rest of the world starts forgetting who you were, and you begin to remember who you were always meant to be. Not in the life you lived, but in the one that called for you, from the other side of the stone. The first few days feel normal. That's what most survivors, or those who've narrowly escaped, report. After the initial shock, life resumes, work continues, meals are eaten. But beneath it all, something begins to shift. You find yourself hesitating mid-sentence. Words evaporate from your tongue. You walk into rooms and forget why you came. Not just once or twice, but over and over again, until it feels like the walls themselves are erasing your intent. The world starts treating you differently. Not people necessarily, but the world. Doors stick, screens flicker, familiar streets look slightly off. You catch glimpses of your own reflection doing things your body hasn't. Sometimes it blinks slower, sometimes it doesn't blink at all. Some report auditory distortions, not voices, but impressions, like hearing your name being spoken by someone you used to know, but haven't thought about in years. Others hear old songs playing in reverse, only when no one else is around. These aren't hallucinations, they're signatures, echoes of the unlived, trying to sync themselves with your current timeline. What's especially chilling is that those around you also begin to forget things about you. Co-workers forget your birthday. Friends miss your name in group messages. One man found his face cropped out of a family photo that had hung untouched on the wall for 10 years. No one in his household could remember why. That man, by the way, kept a journal. In it, he chronicled the weeks after seeing his grave. He wrote about how he began to feel less tethered to his body, how he'd wake up and not recognize the room he'd slept in, how sometimes he'd open his mouth to speak and a different voice would come out. Familiar, but older, and always just slightly behind his thoughts. The last line in that journal simply read, "I don't think I'm the version that was meant to stay." The phenomenon has been called a form of metaphysical substitution. That once you witness your own grave, the name you were never given but always owed, a part of you begins to shift timelines. The version of you who was meant to carry that name starts bleeding through. And that version doesn't always want to share. Several researchers in cognitive metaphysics believe this is not possession, but displacement. Your consciousness begins to slide along the curvature of forgotten probabilities. The life that was never lived begins asserting itself, not violently, but persistently. It's not a battle for control. It's an overwriting. In rare cases, people have reported completely losing their sense of past identity. A woman in Lisbon was found wandering a cathedral, speaking fluent Akkadian, an extinct language she had no known exposure to. She couldn't remember her own name, but when presented with various tombstone names collected from similar cases, she pointed to one and wept. Another man claimed that after seeing his grave, he began dreaming in third person, watching himself, his real self, from the outside. And in those dreams, the him in the grave always looked back, expressionless, mouthing a single word he could never hear. Then there are the disappearances. They're quiet, untraceable, but always follow the same rhythm. A detachment from the world, a shift in name recognition, a fading from records, until one day, nothing responds to your presence, not even your own reflection. A fringe theory suggests the graves are not warnings, but invitations, that they only appear when the threshold between two versions of self is thin enough to breach, and that stepping too close, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, acts as a kind of consent, because in the eyes of the universe, names are not just labels, they're locks. And the moment the wrong name fits too well, the door begins to open. And once it does, the version of you behind it doesn't want to stay buried. We tend to think that names are given, not chosen. But what if it's the opposite? What if names choose us? And when we refuse them, they wait. Not out of vengeance, but out of inevitability. Perhaps that's what these graves are. The patient footprints of identities that were supposed to happen, but never did. To most, they look like headstones. But to those who've seen their own, they feel more like mirrors. Not of who they are, but of who they were always meant to be. These graves don't mourn. They don't mark death. They claim something unfinished, something still reaching. And maybe that's the horror of it. Not that your grave appears before you die, but that you were never really living as yourself to begin with. You lived under borrowed names, inherited dreams, quiet compromises. And the moment you got too far from your true shape, the world began correcting itself. You won't notice it all at once. It begins subtly. Friends forgetting your voice. A stranger calling you by a name you've never heard, but instinctively respond to. A song playing on the radio that shouldn't exist. And then, one night, you'll be walking home and see a pale stone beneath the streetlight, waiting. No flowers, no offerings, just a name. Not the one on your birth certificate, not the one on your ID, but the one the universe wrote down when you first diverged. The one assigned to the version of you that never betrayed your heart, never gave up the art, the love, the wild thing you buried to survive. You might laugh it off, walk away, pretend it was a dream, and maybe you'll be lucky, maybe you'll forget, but not everyone does. Some feel something following after, not a presence, a pull, like gravity, but sideways, something that wants you not gone, just aligned, because identity is a fragile thing, not made of blood or bones, but of stories, and when the story goes unfinished for too long, it begins to rewrite itself, with or without you. You don't die when you're forgotten. You die when the world no longer knows what to call you. And sometimes, all it takes to disappear is a name that fits a little too well.